For years, I had been sitting in women's circles, listening to women share about their lives. I was touched deeply by the initiatory experiences women were having by giving birth to their babies, getting married, divorced, struggling to find their voice or career in the midst of their menstrual cramps, like all the things that women face with their bodies, their sexuality, and all that's hidden around what women experience. I began to wonder, wouldn't the wisdom that's arising in these small groups be of benefit to a greater world that is really needing a wise woman's real testimonial from her real life? The truth is, I became obsessed with secret stories because I had a secret that I'd been carrying around for years, one that I didn't want anyone to know. And I had convinced myself if I had shared my secret painful story, that my family would disown me, my friends would disown me. And I kept that secret for a really long time. I only found the courage to share my own true life story when I gathered this circle of women around me who were also willing to do the same. After telling my story year after year in the universe, I started to feel this wild permission growing inside of myself to be more and more of me and stop apologizing. And I started to forgive myself and forgive the circumstances and forgive the people who were involved in my story. I needed other women around me, listening, loving me, and really affirming that my vulnerability was my greatest asset. So what often makes a really great story is a villain. It creates this tension in a story between the victim and the villain. But in the universe, we have one rule. There's no villainizing. I coach all of my storytellers to look at the people and the circumstances in their story as if it was part of them, to allow them to have a different view of their story. Because if they start to tell their true life story as if there's a villain, there has to be a victim. And if that victim is them, they remain stuck in this story where they're always disempowered and they're always at the effect of some negative force on the outside. And eventually, if they tell a story from that perspective of being a villain or a victim, that they never get out of that story. So in the universe, when we craft our true life stories and we look at a story from the perspective that everything in the story is a part of us, and we learn from our story that way, we take ownership of our narrative. We take ownership of our choices. And it's as if we empower ourselves in the past, and then we carry that power into the future, no longer seeing ourselves as a victim, no longer seeing the outside world as villains. Instead, seeing ourselves as characters in a human drama where things are gained and things are lost. And that cycle happens over and over. And the best thing we can do is find our courage of heart and our compassion for us and those that were involved in our stories. There's a special kind of magic that arises between a storyteller and a listener. I think of it as like a third thing, this benevolent force. There's even been studies by psychologists that talk about what happens when a storyteller shares with a listener who's really listening. This benevolence, this empathic force arrives for healing for the storyteller and the one who's listening, which is why I have found it crucial for this process to complete itself by bringing the women's stories that we have been sharing in this closed, safe crucible out into our community so that the women can share this vibration of their stories, this truth of their stories, and it can ripple out into the community. And women and men who are listening to these stories can have that benevolence, that heart opening happen for them too. That's why the audience is so important. That's why these women are sharing their stories, even in the midst of COVID, even through the virtual world. This healing energy is still absolutely possible for everyone.